Okay, welcome back. Today we're going to look at and actually get our hands on a camera. So just a real quick recap. So first video was about what makes a better photo. We looked at the basic rules of photography, and we then went on to the two critical aspects of getting a good photo, which was exposure and then focus. And if you've watched those, you should now have a pretty good understanding of what we need to do in order to set our camera up so that we can get the sort of shots that we're talking about. Remembering that the whole aim of using your camera is to have full control of the photograph you're taking, and take all the control back from the camera, maybe apart from just there's one thing which we'll talk about where you allow the camera to do things automatically. Okay, so we're going to get on in a moment to actually looking at the camera and seeing how we actually do that. But the objective, what are we trying to do? What do we want to do to our camera that will make it as easy as possible for us to get better photos? And that is to be able to forget the camera, and rather than thinking about the camera and these settings, what do I need to do, and this isn't right, I need to go in the menu and change that, we want to be able to focus on the photograph. So what is in front of the camera? How can I be as creative as possible, and focus on that rather than the camera, yet still have full control? And actually it's quite easy. And I don't think, I'm hoping this isn't going to be a long video. I'm not going to go into all the camera settings. This isn't about how to use your Sony A7 III. There's tons of videos out there that do that, and if I mention something, if I talk about something in the rest of this video and you don't understand it in relation to your camera, because I've only got a Nikon and a Sony, so if you've got a Canon or an Olympus and you kind of get what I've said but you don't know how to do it on your camera, for goodness sake, get online, type something in that will get you to a YouTube video which will explain that particular thing, and find out how to do that on your camera. Don't just say, he didn't cover that so I don't understand it. Do a little bit of work, a bit of research, and you can end up with your cameras working the same way that mine do. And I think that will allow you to take better photos, which, if you remember, was the object of the exercise. Okay. So let me explain on the camera what settings, the major settings that we're going to look at. We're going to look at the mode, which is going to be A, aperture priority, not auto. Focus, the area is going to be spot. The focus mode is going to be continuous. Exposure is going to be spot. And I thought about what I was saying yesterday about focus, sorry, the day before, the video before about exposure. And I said, and always use spot. And realised that if you can't link it to the focus point, then that's going to make life difficult. And the way over that is to, if you can't link the exposure spot to the focus spot, then you would probably be best to stick to matrix metering using a whole screen, which is not the preferred way, but it will make life easier. But you will have to use more focus compensation to actually get your subject to be the correct exposure, rather than, as I explained, on matrix metering or whole screen metering, it's trying to average everything out. You need to look at your subject and use the focus, the exposure compensation, to get your subject to be the correct exposure, and the rest of the scene is whatever it is. Okay, we're going to try and look actually at my camera a bit closer, so let's do that. Okay, we're looking here at my Nikon D800. We are going to cover after this my Sony A7 III. So remember, this Nikon is a DLSR, so if you have a Canon, apart from the latest Canon mirrorless cameras, the setup is going to be similar to the Nikon, although obviously every camera is different. Even though I've got a Nikon camera here, there are probably at least half a dozen different designs of Nikon camera. And the Sony, again, you might have a different Sony, you might have a Sony but it's not an A7 III. They're all going to be different, and unless I did 50 different videos, I can't cover your individual camera. So as I said earlier, take on board the gist of what I'm saying, and if you need to get onto YouTube to find out the details, please do that. So let's deal with the things we've spoken about. So the mode. On many cameras, there will be a separate dial, maybe over this side, where you can click round and you can pick the mode. And the mode, the letters will be something like M for manual, A for aperture, P for program, S for shutter priority, and then there may be some others, auto, plus of course video and that kind of things. So the one we're looking for is aperture priority. Now on this Nikon, this particular model, you can see here I've got a button mode, and if I turn the camera on, you can see up here we have A, and I simply need to use this back button and I can go from A to M to P to S and back to A. So we want A for aperture priority. Next is focus. And on this Nikon, and in fact on most Nikons, focus is achieved by pressing a little button on the side here. We've got AF on the switch and M, so I can move the switch. If I want manual focus, I can just move the switch to manual focus and back to AF, autofocus, and there's a little button there, and if I press that button, you'll see that we've come up with S for single area. So this is a single focus point. I've also got a choice of 9 points, 21 points, or all 51 points. I've also got 3D, which is a tracking mode, and we've got fully auto. And we want single point autofocus. And then you'll notice, excuse me, down here we've got AFC. So this is in continuous, this is the mode. So we've set the area as being a single focus point. We now want to set the mode to be continuous, and I've only got continuous or single shot on this. You might have auto as well, and as long as we're on C for continuous, we've now dealt with focus. When it comes to exposure, on this Nikon, it's incredibly simple, and this is why I love this camera. It's as I said, it's about 7 or 8 years old. It is so simple to use. It's just absolutely brilliant. The exposure is simply on this button here. I've got spot. I hope you can see that. I've got the whole screen there, or I've got center weighted. We mentioned all of these, excuse me, when we were talking about exposure. So as you can see, if I want to switch from one to the other, it's not the easiest button to turn. We just move the button to, that would be full screen or center weighted. So we want single spot, single point exposure, and that is that set up. Now the D800 is what Nikon call one of their professional cameras, and we don't actually need to do anything to set the exposure to follow the focus point. If I've got the focus point set to single point and the exposure set to single point, the camera automatically links the exposure spot to the focus spot. I don't need to do any settings at all. When we come to the Sony, you'll see that I do have to set that. And some other Nikon cameras, you may have to to go into the settings, into the menu, and turn something on to make it follow the focus point. That would be in the custom setting menu. It will probably be under metering and exposure, if that's the case. One of the things I said that we would also do is remove the focusing function from the shutter. So when we press the shutter release, it will not focus. We're going to move the focusing to this button here at the back. And the way you do that on the Nikon, again, it's going to be different on a camera, but if you go on YouTube and you just type in back button focus, you will get 1,000 videos telling you how to do it on your particular model of Canon, Olympus, Panasonic, whatever else. So to set the back button focus, so for the back button focus on this Nikon, and it may be different on yours, and as I've said on different cameras, check out on YouTube how to do this. We go to AF activation and you'll see it's off. So we can have the shutter AF on, or we can have AF on only. So make sure that's okay, and that's fine, so that it shows up here as off. So that has now removed the focusing function from the shutter, and unfortunately I can't show you the view through the screen, but I can show you live view. Hopefully that's too bright. Sorry, I'm going to have to, you probably can't see the screen. There we go. That's a bit better, I hope. We've got a green box here, and if I press the button, you can see it focuses. If I press the shutter halfway, which on most cameras would make it focus, you can see it does absolutely nothing. If I take a shot, it takes a shot. It doesn't refocus. Okay, now there's one thing we do need to also set up to make life really easy for exposure. And going back to the video on exposure, I said there are 3 things that affect exposure. You've got the aperture, and can I show you on here? Yep, I can change the aperture on the front dial. So we're changing that there. The speed is automatically adjusted. And I don't know if you can see it, I hope you can. We've got something flashing here saying ISO Auto. And a few minutes ago I said that there was one thing that we're going to let the camera do itself, and that is adjust the ISO, because I really don't care too much about the ISO. If I go into the shooting menu and I come down to ISO sensitivity settings, I hope that's coming out clear on the screen. I can go into there and you get this sub menu. Now this allows me to set the parameters for what the ISO can do. You can see that I've got a maximum ISO of 6400. I could use higher. These are artificial, if you like, numbers. They're boosted ISO. It's not the real ISO of the camera, so I've got that set as high as it will go. I can set the minimum shutter speed, and I've set 1/60th of a second, which if you go back to one of the previous videos, I'm not sure which one, I mentioned that we need to keep the shutter speed reasonably high to avoid 2 things: camera shake and also people moving. And 1/60th of a second for most situations where people are just pretty well standing still, or just maybe moving slightly, talking to other people and that kind of thing, that would be fine. If you were to go to the park to take some pictures of your kids playing on the swings and that sort of thing, you might want to increase that minimum shutter speed to a 500th or maybe even a 1,000th of a second. The reason I've chosen a relatively slow speed there is that will affect the ISO. Remember, the 3 things balance each other: the aperture, the speed and the ISO. And if we push the speed up higher, the only way the camera can compensate is by pushing up the ISO to get the correct exposure, which is possibly going to give us more noise. If you're that example I just said, where you're out of the park with the kids, it's outdoors, even on a quite cloudy day, it's going to be quite bright, so really not too much to worry about there. The auto part that I mentioned is the sensitivity. We're not setting the ISO to a particular number, we are letting the camera choose what the ISO will be to give us the correct exposure. And pretty well every camera made in the last probably 10 years should have something like that. Again, you might have to do some research to find it, but it will be there. Which now means, sorry, and also I can set the lowest ISO that I want the camera to go to. I could stop the camera at, I'm not sure why I would want to do this actually. I could stop the camera going any lower than 200 ISO. I've got it set as low as the camera will go, because on a bright sunny day I might need it to be really, really low, because whilst this has got an 8,000th of a second top shutter speed, if I'm shooting with the lens wide open, there may still be too much light, and using the really, really low ISO will allow me still to get correct exposure. Okay, I'm not going to talk any more about the Nikon. I hope that's been enough to help you create a camera that is now a point and shoot camera. And again, I can't show you through the viewfinder, but on the back screen I can now move my focus point. As you can see it moving across there. Hopefully, let me just drop the ISO on this a bit more so that you can hopefully see. And we can focus on the radiator there. I can use the back button to actually focus, and I can take a shot. I don't need to think anything about anything else. Everything is going to be automatic, but it's fully in my control. If I want to change the ISO, if I want to change the aperture, I've just got one button to tweak, and I can still just focus and take the shot, and I still get a proper photo. Nothing else to think about. Should I decide that I want the scene to be a bit brighter, I can simply use this button, this control here, to bring in the exposure compensation, and I can take whatever sort of picture I want, brighter or darker. Very easy to work with. That's the Nikon. Let's now move on to the Sony. Okay, so we're looking here at my Sony a7 III. Let's go through the same procedure that we did with the Nikon just a second ago. So, first thing we're going to do is set the mode to aperture priority, and as I mentioned with the Nikon, we've still got the manual, shutter priority, aperture priority, program, but we've also got some other settings on this camera. We've got auto, we've got scene, S&Q, we've got a movie mode, and we've got 2 user presets where I can just set the camera up in a certain way and it will instantly go to whatever I've set the camera to do. So the next thing is we're going to set the focus area. The Sony camera is so customizable, as you've just seen. Every single button on this camera is set to be what I want it to do. So even if you've got a Sony a7 III, you won't have the same thing set on your buttons as that I have. So you will have to find them in the menu, but they're there somewhere. I've got the bottom of the control wheel here set to be set to the focus area, and we have the wide area, we have a zone, we have center, and we've got flexible spot, and we've actually got 3 different sizes of flexible spot: small, medium and large. We've also got expandable flexible spot and lock on flexible spot. So I'm not even going to talk about those. The only one that I'm interested in is the flexible spot there. So that sets the area, and I hope you can see a little yellow box there. That is the focus area. and on this camera I can use the touchscreen to move the focus spot to wherever I want it to be, or I can use the joystick. Okay, so that's focus area. Now focus mode is the right button here, the right side of the control wheel, and as you can see I've got it in AFC, but we've got AFS, so single shot autofocus, automatic, which I think you've got the gist now. We don't want anything automatic apart from ISO. We've got AFC continuous, which is what we want. We've got direct manual focus, and we've got ordinary manual focus. Not talking about those, we're just going to go for continuous autofocus. So that covers focus. Next is exposure, and we want to have spot exposure. Now, unlike the Nikon, which has got a little dial, we do have to set that in the menu. And I've got this button set to my metering mode, and we have multi, which means the entire screen. We've got center weighted, which as the name suggests is the center, spot, which is what we want. We've also got entire screen average, and I have to confess I don't know what that is, how that is different to matrix. And we've also got something called highlight, so we're just going for spot standard. The spot large or spot standard. Spot standard is what I use. Next on the agenda is to link the focus point to link the exposure spot point to the focus spot point. And as we saw on the Nikon, it does it automatically. If you choose spot for both exposure and focus, it links the two together. This doesn't do that. So on the Sony, it's the top menu, it's menu number 1, exposure, which is menu number 9, and menu number 10, spot metering point, and you have a choice. You can either have the spot metering point as the center, or you can do focus point link, and obviously that's what I've done. And whilst I'm here, I'll also mention that back button focus on this camera, we're on the correct menu, so I'll mention it while we're here. AEL with shutter is off, so we can, I'm not sure what auto does, I can't imagine what auto does, but we turn that off, and we now have back button focus. So what does the linking the exposure to the focus point really do? If I put the focus spot, which is following my finger, across onto a fairly bright part of the image here, you can see that we've got complete, absolute black shadow over this side. If I move the focus spot over to here, you can see that we have correct exposure now where the focus point is, and this side of the picture is completely blown out highlights. I've also set this dial here to be focus compensation, so I don't need to use, it's actually got a dedicated dial, but I just need to dial that down, and I can drop the the exposure down to a level where I think I'm comfortable with it. Hit back button focus, that's now focused, take the shot, and I can shoot an entire wedding without changing anything on this camera. So that's the setup that I use. That is what you're aiming for, to enable you to focus, to think about, to concentrate purely on what's in front of the camera rather than the camera itself. That's it, guys. As I say, the object of the exercise is to show you what is achievable, and on these two cameras how you can do it. You will need to do some more research. If you've got questions, specific questions, I'm quite happy to answer them. Drop me a message and I will do my best to answer it. Thanks for watching. And in the next video, we are going to actually use our cameras to take some photographs. We'll talk about using the camera, about composition, about light, shadow, and about creating a better photograph. Thanks for watching.